And I should just note, for those who aren't from Toronto, there's 43 more like that on the council. I went to Edmonton to see the council chamber, and I said, well, where are the rest of the seats for all the other people? But having said that, I want to just first of all say bonjour, bienvenue, welcome, in particular to the people from out of town, my colleagues, my confreres who are mayors and others in elected office, and especially the two ministers and the head of CMHC who are here today. Anna described it as like a wedding day, and I guess I sort of figure that, you know, at a wedding there are two people that are there to support the couple that are getting married. So we have here, I'm sure, to provide support, the two ministers. And I don't know whether Emerson is the ring bearer or what, but he's the man that seems to have quite a lot of money. But I'm delighted that they're here, and I'm delighted that we have the advocates and the activists and the experts. And you know, Pam is right. I mean, you are going to help us with advice, you're going to help us with ideas, but most of all, I think you're going to help by being advocates, because we, well, we're pushing, and we're all doing this in a cooperative spirit, and I want to focus on that today. We also need to be reminded ourselves about this. I would just like to make one short comment about Orange Shirt Day. It's something that is being commemorated across the country, but I had the chance and took the time to go and spend 4 days in a remote Northern Ontario Indigenous community, First Nations community this summer. And I'll just say to those, because there are people out there who are skeptical about things that have multi-generational impact, and there's a lot of those we could talk about, but I certainly came back having talked to survivors, having spent 4 days with families in one of our remote First Nations communities, understanding multi-generational impact, and it helped me as the Mayor of Toronto to understand some of the other communities that have multi-generational issues that they're dealing with as well. So that's why today, in the context of the residential schools issue, is an important day. We are here today to acknowledge that our cities and our communities are looking affordable housing, and the crisis related to affordable housing square in the eye. In Toronto and across the country, we are facing increasing pressures, and they're not new, but they're increasing, related to the repair and operations of our social housing, related to homelessness and our growing urban Aboriginal populations, and of course to the more broadly felt strains that occur when people simply can't afford to live in our biggest cities, which are the engine of our economy, or access the opportunities that safe and reliable housing can provide. When housing is in crisis, the impacts are real, and the effects are felt across all ages and all income levels. And so we're here to discuss the fact that we have a problem. We, in the broadest collective sense, not just politicians, not just any particular one order of government, but we in the broadest sense. And I've been very clear in something that I've come to understand very well, and I think one of the bits of good news is that the business community are increasingly coming to understand the fact this is not just a social issue, this is a big, significant economic issue as well. Our economic stability and success, which are so important to fund the programs that Pam McConnell talked about of all different kinds, including others that, like as basic as healthcare and so on, those things, the prosperity and success, are jeopardized if hardworking people simply can't afford to live in our biggest cities or anywhere else in the country. And in Canada, we work hard to make sure we don't exclude people on any basis, and housing affordability is a threat to that core value if it's not something that people can find in our big cities. We're also here, though, in that spirit of optimism and can-do that I think we can demonstrate over and over again, and we do, to acknowledge that there is something that we can do about this. This is an issue that we can address. And I don't think any of us should come into this room or leave this room today with any doubt about that. Housing issues are complex. The need is great, but we can take action, and that's why Pam's parting words were very appropriate in terms of some actions that we can hopefully come out of this room with today. And so today we begin to lay out a plan of action and to join forces to do the things that are going to be needed to keep our cities and our country livable and affordable for everyone. We know there's a way because there are examples across the country. Here in Toronto, we're meeting in the midst of just such an example as Pam referenced. We're gathered here at the Daniel Spector in Regent Park, and it's a community that exists because all levels of government got together with for-profit and non-profit housing providers and other kinds of experts and people with ingenuity, and got something done to execute a vision. Housing solutions are found when collaboration is the order of the day and is at the center of the approach to funding and to execution. And I think it requires a recognition of something obvious in terms of both basic math and equity, namely that local taxpayers anywhere in this country, property taxpayers principally when it comes to cities, cannot finance this totally on their own. It's just a fact. We have nearby here another shining example, a little bit older, but nonetheless, to the glory days. It really harks back to the glory days when CMHC was the resident expert for this whole country, a huge resource to us, not just financially, but otherwise. And that, of course, is the St. Lawrence neighborhood. And I want to take a moment to remind people of how that happened. The City of Toronto approved the acquisition of a 44-acre, basically derelict industrial site in 1974. The first residents moved into that community that is thriving today, 5 years later, only 5 years later. When the St. Lawrence neighborhood was completed, it had more than 3,500 residential units, it had schools, it had a library, it had a community center, and it had bus service. And the work was led by the mayor at the time, David Crombie, along with an amazing team of city staff and other councillors like John Sewell. He writes about it quite a bit in his book, and I think he deserves more credit than he gets, but outside partners and federal and provincial allies. Back then, housing was also at the forefront of public awareness, just like it is today, and this team knew why they were doing what they were doing and what they had to achieve. Alan Littlewood, who many of you in this room will know, was the architect and planner for the community, and he said that having the clear vision for the neighborhood is what drove real action in record time. He said, and I quote, "Normally you get bureaucratic mess and civil servants protecting their turf." He said that in the Toronto Star 2 years ago. And he went on to say, suddenly people were moving mountains to get things done. So it is possible to move those mountains. We know that from experience like this, and like St. Lawrence neighborhood and like others. Next year, Edmonton will break ground on an innovative housing project guided by a multi-sector group that Mayor Iveson formed in 2014. The project is found in the Londonderry neighborhood. It will see a new mixed market neighborhood spring up where old decrepit houses once stood, and it will introduce a new financially sustainable model for operations. So we need to take these examples, and there are others from across the country, and build on them. They represent more so than anything else the absolute standing proof that this can be done when people work together. And I think that we are in this country and in this city, again, at another incredible moment in time. And as I was saying a week or so ago at the Board of Trade, moments in time don't last for a moment, but they also don't last forever. You have to seize the opportunity where we have governments that are collaborating together like never before and say, fine, now is the time to act, not just on transit, where I think we have acted in a very constructive way, and I commend both the government of Premier Kathleen Wynne and the government of Prime Minister Trudeau for the fact that they're working with us in cities across the country, different premiers and so on, to actually get something done in this space. And I think that housing, together with public transit and public spaces, these are the issues for a generation. And I say for a generation because we have a point in time where we can make a difference for a generation, but I think it also is a difference that will affect more than one generation of people in our country. I don't think any of us in public life, certainly not the mayor as president, and I'm sure it applies to the others, I don't think any of us are prepared to say to some of our most vulnerable fellow citizens, too bad, in one of the wealthiest countries in the world, we just couldn't act to keep our social housing in proper repair, or to keep agreements in place that made sure that they were sustainable over time. I don't think any of us is prepared to say to an entire generation of younger people, too bad, there's really no hope for you when it comes to being able to afford to live in big cities like Toronto or Edmonton or Vancouver or London or Ottawa. You better go somewhere else. I don't think we're prepared to do that. I don't think we're prepared to countenance in doing that. And I believe that we have reason to be optimistic that we're not going to say that. We don't have to say that right here, right now. I think there's reasons for that optimism. We have a federal government that has committed itself to middle-class prosperity, to infrastructure investments, to climate targets, to social inclusion and Aboriginal issues, all of which, as Pam McConnell said so well, are fundamentally tied to the housing issue. We have a minister here today, and the very fact he's here today, I think, is indicative of this. He understands the profound policy impacts that occur when Canadians do not have a secure home to call their own. And we have a solid team of government caucus members who come from cities and urban areas, somebody like Adam Vaughan in particular, who came right from this very city council that I have the privilege to lead today, who understand how vital this work is in their own neighborhoods and to their own residents. Provincially, we have a premier in this province who has defined herself through the lens of social justice. Her deputy premier, Debbie Matthews, has said of affordable housing, we need all hands on deck, all of us have to work together. Our province has demonstrated on transit, on trade, on environmental targets that they want to be constructive, contributing partners as well. And the city, I believe, has done the same thing in terms of some of the initiatives that we've undertaken, especially in recent times with the poverty reduction strategy, with the Open Door program led by Councillor Baila, who's shown such leadership on this at the city level. And so it is a moment in time. And it isn't just a moment, but as I said earlier, it doesn't last forever. And so the message that I think is meant to come out of this, more important than the details, which are important, is that we have to join forces together to keep our communities affordable and accessible. It should be our defining work together. The stakes are very real. I think that the palm of the hand and the 5 fingers put up by Deputy Mayor McConnell indicates so well how this is all interconnected. When our housing is under strain, we know that other parts of our system suffer, not to mention that people suffer. That's the most important thing. And I think the province and the federal government both understand that. It actually costs us more not to act than it does to act, and I mean that both financially and socially. You all know, and I'm sure it'll come up in our discussions later today, we can cite 100 examples, if not 1,000, of the fact that, to pick one example, it is not compassionate and it's not sensible to have somebody suffering from mental health issues spend months in an expensive acute care hospital bed because supportive housing is not available. And there's an example And so I think we know that investing in affordable housing and helping to invest as well in the social housing stock we already have will relieve some of the strain on our health care system. It will relieve some of the strain on our correction system. It will help us with some of our environmental goals, and most important of all, it will protect the opportunities and the equality that we hold dear as Canadians. And so I'm proud, as the Mayor of Toronto, that our city is part of this vital national conversation and that we've taken this small step today to bring these people together into a room. And I do again thank especially my fellow mayors for joining us and our ministers for taking on this defining issue. This morning, at a meeting we had just before we came here, we presented Minister Duclos and Minister Ballard with 7 principles for housing that we believe can lay the groundwork for real change through the creation of a national housing strategy. In Toronto, and I know this is true of the other mayors because they were present this morning and said so, we are ready to do our part. We are ready to collaborate on taking a bold path forward. But time, as they say, is of the essence. Funding is being lost. Units are being closed for lack of repair. Waiting lists are growing and not shrinking. People are losing hope. And so I think we have to be motivated and be focused and have that sense of urgency that I think I can sense in this room. And I think we then have to move forward from this room today to move those mountains that we talk about. And we have proven it in Toronto, we've proven it in other parts of this country, that when we put our values and our will together and combine it with the money that we know exists in a wealthy country like this, that we can actually get this done. And so I look forward to today's discussions in that context. Thank you very much.